So, this is an introduction to a module that I am going to talk about on return migration. This is part of the diaspora and migration course, and this is part of the e-Pathshala series that we have been doing. My name is Arpana Rayaprol. I am a professor of sociology at the University of Hyderabad, and it is my work on diaspora and migration that is making me talk to you about this today. I hope I can inculcate an interest in migration. Today we are in the 21st century, and return is a very, very interesting concept, very different from what we were used to several hundreds of years ago. So, let us now move to understanding return as a migrant process. Large-scale transformations and movements have been the preoccupations of social scientists around the world. When we are talking about return, we are talking about movement back to the nation of origin. What do we mean by the nation of origin? Historians have looked at the way migrants have moved, went out, come back in. What is come back in? Coming back means somebody has left their home country, they have gone out and they have returned because the reason for going out no longer holds. They have completed their work and they have come back home. This was very common during indentured labor. What do I mean by indentured labor? I am sure you have seen in the other modules that historically, because we have been a British colony, Indian laborers were sent to different countries such as Malaysia, Indonesia, Mauritius and West Indies or the Caribbean nations. So, at that point of time, people only had a fixed contract, and it was also called what we call today one kind of a forced labor. They are forced to go. They are not really voluntary migrants, but they are forced. So, they automatically return after 5 years. But it is historians who have primarily looked at these different kinds of moving around the globe. Sociologists, on the other hand, have tried to understand the processes of movement, the processes of return. Political scientists have seen the way nations have facilitated movement and return, and we will talk about this in another module later, which looks at migrations and the Indian state and its relationship to return migration. So, what am I meaning by change? Change means people who have assimilated in the new cultures, people who have had acculturation. Assimilation means when they try to become part of the larger culture. Acculturation means when they learn new things. So, migration automatically results in assimilation and acculturation, but sociologists generally have preferred to understand the processes of change. Sociologists also look at migration and return as a dynamic process, not as a static process. For instance, the nation state has changed a lot when the migrant returns, and the nation that they have moved to has also changed a lot. There is a very close relationship between the study of three aspects: migration, diaspora and return. This is the relationship that I am going to talk about, the relationship that goes on between diaspora on the one hand and migration on the other hand. That relationship is between places. Where are they returning to? It is really the concept of home, or if you want to put it more specifically, it is a concept of homeland. How does one look at homeland? Diaspora historically has related homeland particularly with that of the Jews. Return is part of the consciousness. It is an emotional return. It is a philosophical return. It is not a real return of time and space. The term diaspora originally was used for Jews who left their homeland, and that homeland became for them a homeland of the mind. And when Jews dispersed all over the world, whether in Russia, whether in Europe, whether in America, they always wanted to return. But nearly at the end of the 21st century, one has to be conscious of the way in which these professionals are returning to the homeland. I will now make a connection between return and home. What is home? Home is different things to different people. It is a space. It is a geographical space, meaning it is a concrete home. So home could be in Telangana, it could be in Israel. But for the Indian or the Telugu who went from Warangal Medical College to Atlanta in US, home is definitely Warangal. But he or she may think of home also as Hyderabad, because the generation changed. The Warangal doctor has invested in Hyderabad. So Hyderabad becomes the home. So Hyderabad of the 21st century is a concrete geographical space. So when I am talking about this kind of return, when I say home, you visualize a home. So for some, it may be a new apartment that they have invested in. For some, it may be the home that their grandparents still live in. For some, it may just be a memory. Some time back, there were people from the Caribbean coming over and looking for roots. 7th generation migrants. And they come and say, I want to look at home. I want to see how chutney is prepared. And in Telangana and Andhra, we have millions of types of chutneys. What is one chutney? But for the Caribbean migrant, the chutney from the home has become an expression not just of what she eats or cooks in her kitchen, but a kind of music that is connected to chutney. So she comes back, reverse migration, and opens a restaurant with the title Chutney. This is the 21st century for you, where home is taking on extremely different kinds of phenomenon. It's taking on new barriers, it's crossing new barriers, taking on new forms and creating a very, very different world. So for home, we have to understand that it's a geographical space, an emotional entity, and it's not only for the Jews who were exiled. This is the first time I've used that word, but it is a very difficult word in return migration, because those who have been exiled have been politically exiled and they can rarely return. But for the voluntary migrants, like the professional doctor that I gave you an example was, he has not exiled, he just migrated for a better life. And now his daughter wants to go home, not to her home, because for her, home is America, but it is the home of her parents, her fatherland or motherland. And the nation state that is India is also beckoning or asking the new diasporic individuals to return. So who actually returns? As I said, it is the second generation people, because those who have migrated have made their home, they may have been too old, some of them may have died, and when the children want to come, they are coming either to the place where they were born. If they were born here when their parents went, they were very, very small, or they are coming to the parents' home. So it's a very, very interesting kind of place, because when they were in the diaspora, a lot of it was talked about as nostalgia. From, you know, in India it was not like that. In India, people respect elders, but here they come to that India, which is a globalized India. But India is not alien, because they are returning to homeland nevertheless, but a homeland which is a concrete space on their social media, on Facebook, on Twitter and everything else, where they are consuming what it means to actually return. So according to Clifford, it is a lived space. What is the meaning of a lived space? A space that is inhabited, a space that is crucially the same. And one needs to look at what is this memory, what is this nostalgia. Nostalgia is something that you think about with fond memories, positively, not with negative memories. Pain is associated with a different kind of nostalgia, but these kind of memories are extremely sharp and they are usually good. So, the return also needs to be good. The attitude of the diasporic group is something that says, why? Why return? Return because of certain kinds of reasons. The relationship between the host land on the one hand and the homeland on the other. What is the relationship? Let me go back and talk about the Indian state a little bit. The Indian state in the 1960s was struggling, newly independent, excited, a Nehruvian dream of wanting to be an equal India, reaching out to the masses. The problem that what Nehru handed down to his daughter was a very poor nation. As far as economic situation was concerned, India was at its lowest. And that was the reason for also what we call the traditional push factor of migration. The India of the 21st century is economically solid, extremely good, where you are attracting as a nation several multinational companies to come and invest in India. There, the primary reason for return is opportunities, economic opportunities. Go back to the first reason about why people migrate. Better opportunities, upward social mobility, vertical mobility only of an upward kind. Same reasons, people may come back not for vertical mobility alone, but for a kind of a mix of both living of the life as well as reliving the nostalgia that they grew up with, that the parents gave them with a lot of hope, a lot of dreams. So, these dreams come true concretely. If a multinational company agrees to pay the same salary that they get in America or New Zealand in India, that money goes a long way. So, the entire family migrates and lives here. That is the economic reason. What is the emotional reason? Family. I want my children to grow up in India, they say. Why? Because India is my home. I want my daughter to grow up in India, to know the language. Because if you live in America, you hear only one language. So, I want them to learn Telugu, I want them to learn Gujarati, I want them to learn Punjabi. Not all, but any one of them, because the migrant who returns is usually one. Can't they learn it there? They can learn it there, but they don't have enough of a peer group to do it. So, if they come here and they are living in an apartment complex, they can hear many languages. They can learn India. They can be among Indians. They can be among family. Speaking of family, as a sociologist, I also need to bring to the forefront the issues of responsibility of taking care of the elderly. Return migration is closely associated to the concept of needing to take care of parents. Parents are in the stage of life where they require help. So, the migrant returns home to take care of the parents. India in the process of return migration. What do we mean by that? You just saw that slide. It means that the government tries to attract migrants. Philanthropy. Come, give, invest. We will make things easy for you. You know, when in the 90s somebody had to come, they even had to record their laptop in the passport, a camera in the passport. Today people move freely. Your phones are more complicated than the laptops that are available at that time. Technology has changed so much that going up and down has also become very, very flexible. What is that word I have just used? Flexible. Borders have become more easy. So, the Indian state wants to direct migration towards the development of the nation. How do I invest as a diasporic person in India? By returning, by giving back. in the sense I actually give back to the community. So what happens is, and I'll take the example of Punjab over here, a lot of Punjabi migrants who have returned or who have some connections with return have invested heavily in adopting a Punjabi village, providing electricity, providing water, sanitation, all these things that did not happen. I also know someone in the Hyderabad region who had originally moved from Guntur. They went back to Guntur district and invested in the sanitation of 2 villages after having retired in Canada. But what is the interesting part of return is 2 generations returned. The parents' generation returned and the children's generation of the parents were in their 60s. The children were in their 40s. Now, what did they actually do? They started with return migration, the state, by starting something called the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas in 2003. Then they also began to look at the policy. See, the migrant or the diasporic is always seen as the Pravasi, to say in English, the non-resident Indian, meaning NRI. So the NRI usually had very difficult time before 1990. What is important about 1991 is that India opened its doors to liberalization. Policies also began to change and people began to see that this was a very interesting way to woo people back. That was very, very important. I think you need to understand over here that the state said at Pravasi Bharatiya Divas, we will let people come, not just NRIs, but PIOs. PIO is a person of Indian origin. And the PIO is not someone who migrated themselves, but who's tracing their origins to someone who migrated. So one of the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas, a young woman from Malaysia stood up and asked, my great-great-great-grandfather migrated to Malaysia so many years ago. Does that mean that you will not recognize me? Then the PIO card was given. PIO means you are a person of Indian origin, you will have some benefits. The NRI is someone who is already an Indian, who has an Indian passport, but is residing outside, therefore non-resident Indian. That was very, very interesting. So, what was the state's response? Brain drain. Of course, you heard about brain drain about diaspora. But return means brain gain, minus plus. That is a very, very interesting kind of thing. Highly skilled professionals come back home. So, you don't want all the good brains to leave and work for someone else. You want the good brains to come back home. Because home is very, very interesting. In 2009, there was something was noted between 2003 and 2005 that 5,000 tech-savvy Indians from America returned to India. So here, I would say very, very interestingly, we need to have a final count on who returned. Somebody said, we don't really need that count. The thing is, people are coming back. You know they are coming back. The Ministry of Overseas Indian Affairs knows very well that they are coming back. The state is helping them to come back. Cities like Bangalore and Hyderabad try to keep up with the demands. How do they keep up? Our cities are bursting with their seams. But you will find realtors advertising NRIs invest, OCI invest. The other word I use now is OCI, the Overseas Citizen of India. This has been a big move from the government to allow for people to retain their citizenship in the other country, whether it's America or England or Australia or New Zealand or Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia. But you can take a card which allows you to come into India more freely, flexible borders. You don't have to apply for a visa every time, they say. Why is the state doing this? To attract people to return, both in terms of brain investment and in terms of economic investment. This is a point that I have repeated again and again. Bangalore and Hyderabad, cities have become extremely, what should I say, open, gated communities. What is a gated community? A community which has all the facilities. You close the gate and you think you are not in India. The reverse migrants live in India, but with the comforts, material benefits that they have accumulated over a period of time. This is a very difficult and different kind of process. Here, inside the gated community, there are facilities such as tennis courts, swimming pools, clubhouses. They live very close, where they can order their pizzas and their foreign food, and they go to international schools which are very close by, where they go to IB and Cambridge curriculum, and you also see that it is indeed a very interesting kind of shift and change. So people come and live in these gated communities with the idea for wealth, to improve, for being in their own world, and for the biggest thing in the urban jungle, concrete urban jungle, is security. They talk about security. They talk about security all the time because they want to be away from crime. But they have something very interesting in the reverse migration, and that's, I think, a big positive. In these gated communities, a whole lot of jobs have opened up for the working class, a different kind of migrant, say from Bihar or Orissa to Bangalore or Hyderabad. The migrant who comes and works as a security guard, as a domestic help, as a child minder, or as a dog walker. When I am talking about return to the homeland, I am not talking about a uniform kind of return. It's a very complex kind of return. It's return of different classes of migrants. Like indentured labor was a labor class. Even today you have a lot of people going to Gulf countries to work as service and labor. For instance, gender. Men go as plumbers, technicians, electricians, sanitation workers, construction workers, primarily from Hyderabad and Kerala to Gulf countries. This is called a sojourner settlement. They will definitely return. Women go as nurses. Lot of women go from Kerala as nursing staff. They return. And they are not service labor, but they are middle class labor. Because a nurse in the Gulf and in the West is given a lot of respect. And when she comes back home to Kerala, she also automatically brings enough wealth to make her life a little more comfortable. So marriage migration is also reverse migration. For many Kerala nurses, the reverse migration is for marriage. But for those who had migrated for marriage as a professional class, come back to India as married class. So in the terms of family, it is different. There's another very interesting kinds of thing among Indians. Who comes back? Do Telugus come back? Very interesting part about Telugus and doctors is an NRI medical college that is there in the borders of Vijayawada and Guntur. Because a lot of people there who are studying, it's an NRI medical college set up by doctors, but you also have return migrants sending their children to that medical college. You see, the second generation go to college in India just like their parents, but their parents had studied in colleges that had happened to the state. The second generation does something very different. So when the state is wooing people back, they also expect them both brain drain and in investment, like the NRI medical college example I am giving you. The other thing is the state. You had a prime minister visit so many different places recently with the idea that people will invest back in India and make India a global entity. The prediction from those of us who study migration is that reverse migration is not for good, out migration is not for good, but migration is going to be a very, very circular process. What do I mean? I mean that the sojourner model is going to be much more clear than the settler model. The sojourner is somebody who actually invests in a very, very different kind of situation, and they are also trying to make this a different model. They stay in a country for some time, make some money, come back to the homeland and give back. When they give back, they want to give back monetarily as well as intellectually. Reverse migration has also changed the landscape of the city. I think Hyderabad and Bangalore and Delhi, Gurgaon especially, have undergone a transformation like any other global cities. So the intersections of class, caste, region, religion, gender are very, very important. The Dalit woman who comes and works in the return migrants' home, upper caste return migrants' home, is also moving up on the ladder of social mobility, because the opportunities for her have opened like never before. The return migrant is putting the children of the domestic worker in the school. So they are also investing in the education of the lowest of the lower classes. Not everybody is doing it, but the expectation from the state is there and from the people is also there. So return migration should definitely have a good impact. As far as the personal and emotional reason is concerned, a researcher rarely should ask a returnee, is this return for good? Because they don't know the answer themselves. Keeping an open passport, keeping dual citizenship. Reverse migration gives you the OCI card today, the Indian state, but in the future, if the citizenship is allowed in both countries, people have the flexibility. They do not feel that they are outsiders. The outsider status makes them emotionally unstable. Particularly when there are political crises in the world, everyone thinks of the homeland. Therefore, the reason for return is definitely the connect to the homeland. I hope that this model has been clear and you would all pursue and understand that migration is not a one-way process, it is not always a two-way process, but it is a circular and a dynamic process, and return is also not something which is always return. So therefore, when somebody is talking about reverse migration, it is something which is quite similar to the return that I have talked about in this module.